All right.
Do I look a week older?
At least a week older.
Hey, everybody, this is Josh.
And this is Dean.
And here we are back again with another installment of Finding an Agent. And this week, we're going to talk a little bit about what we've been up to. I'm going to talk a little bit about my progress for the last week, and then talk a little bit about some reading material. And so I guess the first thing I'll start off with is kind of an update on what I've been doing. And I'd mentioned that I had written a story recently that was about 13,000 words. I've sent that off to a couple of beta readers, one of them being Dean, and the other one being someone else I won't mention. But that person has gotten the story back to me. I made a couple of corrections, and then when I know Dean's been real busy with his legal work, he had a trial recently, and so haven't gotten feedback from him. Once I get feedback from him, I'm going to get that finished up, and then I think I am going to send that one off. I'm probably going to send that one out to an established market and just see how it does, because I really kind of like this story a lot. And then the other thing that I've been up to is I actually wrote a complete new story this past week. It was pretty short. It ended up being around 16 to 1800 words. And this was really not in my genre wheelhouse. I would call this more of a literary story. And I don't really write literary fiction very often. This is just something that kind of came to me one day and I kind of knocked it out. But I think there's a good chance either A, this story will probably never see the light of day, or if it does, it'll be years down the road when I've had a chance to go back and like really revise it and revisit the whole plot. But anyway, I did kind of knock that out, and in the end, it may have just been a wasted effort because I don't really know if anything will come of it. But that's kind of been my week on the writing front. Dean, how about you? Did you have any new feedback on any of your queries or anything like that?
I have not got any new responses in a while. I'll have to go back and tally. I think there's probably half a dozen that are still outstanding, so no big surprise there. I haven't gotten responses. May never get responses. The one that I sent direct to a publisher, I've not heard back from them either, but that was not that long ago that I did that, so I'm not particularly surprised by that.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Well, on that note, I think we'll go ahead and kind of transition over into what I've been reading. And I don't know if this ties into what I wrote or not, but I mentioned that the little story that I wrote was probably more in the literary vein than in the speculative fiction vein. And the story that I read this week, I think kind of fits into that same thing. It's a little bit more of a literary story, even though it's by Stephen King. It's called The Man in the Black Suit. And a lot of people, if you're Stephen King fans, you've probably read this. It's a pretty famous short story, and it won the O. Henry Award for the short story in 95 or 96, I believe. I want to say Stephen King wrote the story in 95 and it won the award in 96. But it's a horror story, but it was recognized for its literary merit and won the O. Henry Award. And it's about a young boy in 1914 who goes fishing, and a man in a black suit wanders out of the woods, and it turns out to be an encounter with the devil. And it's a pretty interesting story. I think it's particularly interesting in that it's one of the few times that Stephen King's been recognized for literary achievement and not just commercial achievement. But it's a very interesting story. It's one that I've read probably half a dozen times. I go back to it because it's really the kind of story that I aspire to write someday, a story that has really good speculative elements. It's very creepy and scary, but it also has literary merit. And I don't know, Dean, do you have any experience with a particular story that you've read multiple times that maybe that's the kind of story you aspire to write to?
I will say you mentioned O. Henry. I like a lot of O. Henry's short stories, and I have read a number of them. I mean, obviously, everybody reads The Gift of the Magi in high school, and to be able to write a short story of that caliber where, the commitment to the love of this husband and wife for each other, to be able to show that and have this, O. Henry, and O. Henry-esque twist, because, O. Henry, was the master of coming up with a twist like that. I think, it would be nice to be able to write stories of that caliber.
It's kind of interesting that you mentioned that, and that Stephen King won the O. Henry Award, because I will say the Man in the Black Suit is very straightforward. I wouldn't say there's any twist in it whatsoever. It's a very linear tale, but that's also kind of what makes it interesting to me. Like, I don't feel like there's any trickery or gimmickry going on with this story. It's just a very kind of bare bones, straightforward tale that is still like pretty moving. Like emotionally, you connect to this story and you can kind of feel what this little boy's feeling and what he's going through. And there's no surprises. Like, the story plays out probably pretty much like most people would expect it to, but it's still just such a compelling story and so well written that I keep going back to it. And like I said, it was recognized with probably one of, if not, the primary recognition for literary short fiction. And so, pretty interesting story. If you haven't read it, I would definitely encourage people to go out and read The Man in the Black Suit. It's probably one of the best Stephen King short stories out there, at least in my opinion. But yeah, comparing it to O. Henry, it's interesting because there's not a twist or anything in it. It's just very, very laid out. Now we're going to switch off of that Stephen King story. We're going to talk a little bit about what Dean's been reading. Dean, what do you got for us?
All right. Well, I got my next issue of, well, it's some time ago now, Alfred Hitchcock's mystery magazine. This is the July-August edition, because they only do every other month. And I'll just go over some of the stories in here. First of all, interestingly, since it's summertime, I don't know if you can read this, it's got the one major story, which, by the way, I skipped it because I started reading it. I didn't think it looked that interesting. But it says, and more crime travels. And I'm guessing that the reason why is because people are traveling for the summer and going on vacation. And when you're reading, I guess, I don't know, something about human psychology, they want to read about, people on vacation and, something unusual or extraordinary happens to them, while they're on vacation. And I can say that with me, when I travel, I do tend to think up like stories about like things that could happen to me while I'm on the road or traveling or whatever. But I don't know if that's just because I'm also interested in writing, or maybe, people who just enjoy reading also do the same thing. So the first story is about a female cop in Hawaii called the Rabbi. And it starts out with her just at McDonald's, and something extraordinary happens, and there's a robbery, and it turns out that the kid robbing the place is one of her younger brother's friends. And then, like, he's kind of in a tough situation, and she's trying to help him get out of the problem. And it turns out he's been following her as well. And he kind of had like a childhood crush on her. So it's set in Hawaii. So that's obviously, real exciting and, an exotic location. It's kind of like an episode of Hawaii Five-0 or something like that. The next one this one was more humorous, called The Waiting Game. And it's a female ex-spy who has a male partner that I think is also her love interest, and he gets held hostage. And then it's kind of like her efforts to get him out. The author keeps him from being a complete potted plant, I guess, because the male character takes action too to kind of help his situation. So it's kind of like they're working together. It's got a lot of humor in it, and it's kind of humorous how how they kind of resolve that situation. The female ex-spy character, who's now kind of like a private contractor, and they want to blackmail her, force her to do some job for them. She's half Arab and half Spanish, I think. So she's got kind of the exotic woman quality, which is, I dated for very briefly a girl who was Arab, and it was there's definitely that attraction for me of this kind of exotic woman, and I kind of thought of her when I was reading it. So I liked that one. And then there was a couple of others, and then the last one that I kind of read most recently was, this one was interesting. This one is called How I Solved a Blind Pig Murder, and it's set in the South during the Depression era. And the main character, he is like a Southern landowner guy with his tenant farmers that are all black. And one of his black tenants, his nephew, is accused of a crime. And so it's a black kid accused of a crime in the South. But fortunately it's a crime of killing another black person. So like, there's not like a threat of like an interracial violence type situation. So he's just trying to solve the crime. And I thought that was pretty good. I personally would like to be able to write, stories with that kind of setting. I think that was pretty interesting.
Was there anything particularly unique to that setting unfolding, like within the black community versus had it been white characters or what have you?
Yeah, and here's why. The kid that's accused of the crime was at a kind of a bootleg liquor establishment, and the liquor establishment is just like a shack basically, with all the black tenant farmers go to it to buy alcohol, and this is still prohibition. But the shack is located between like 4 different landowners, so no landowner can each landowner can basically, the white landowner can kind of claim, I don't know anything about that, I'm not even sure that's on my land, kind of thing basically. And the kid, basically someone gets shot in the establishment, and the kid goes in and he's found there with blood on his hands and everything. And so it looks like the kid probably did it, but it turns out there's a drug connection, and he's able to show that it probably wasn't the kid, that it was someone else. And so it's pretty intimately tied to that setting, in that sense that there's this murder around that kind of the poor black culture in that area, and then in the context of the wider white culture and segregation, although it's by no means preachy or anything like that. It's just like, this is the way things are in this area, and this is what's going on basically.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's interesting. I wouldn't mind reading some more stuff or being able to write in that area as well.
Yeah, and this guy's name is Mike Culpepper. That sounds like a pretty Southern sounding last name, so I'm suspecting he's probably from the South. It was well done, like I said, and I like the character. I kind of like this this kind of Southern landowner type guy that goes around solving crimes in that era. It's pretty interesting to me. And I wrote a novel kind of set further back than the 30s, more Reconstruction era, but so that was of interest to me. And then the last one I read was just about called The Sweet Life, and it's Eve Fisher is the name of the author. And it's basically like a kid who's about 17 and she's a runaway, and she kind of has a previous drug selling life, and then she decides to go straight and becomes a house cleaner. And so she's working with a bunch of other illegal aliens because she can't legally work because she's underage. But obviously the illegal aliens who are house cleaners aren't legal either, so the employer will overlook the fact that you're not legal to work in the United States. And then the only thing that I thought was kind of, I don't know, wasn't great, was she has this character happen to be cleaning a house that is the drug kingpin from her previous life, that just happens to be that she figures this out. And to me, that was too huge of a coincidence to be realistic. And that, I don't know. I do coincidences too. I mean, and coincidences do happen. So you've always got to draw. There's a fine line there between something that's just too big of a coincidence in a story versus it's okay as a coincidence, and we can have a discussion about that maybe.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, one of the things I noticed when you were talking about these stories is, I think you talked about 4 stories there, and 3 out of the 4 were written by female authors.
And had female protagonists too, I think.
Yeah. So do you find that to be common a lot in the Alfred Hitchcock magazine?
No, I'd say it's about 50-50.
Is there anything else we wanted to talk about this week?
I think that's it.
All righty. Well, I guess with that, we'll sign off. Ask everyone to like and subscribe, leave a comment. And otherwise, I guess we'll catch you next week.
Take care, folks.
Sorry, I got to start over.
I don't know why that's backwards. It's really weird.
Ah, shit. All right.
We'll get better at this as we go, I guess. And
You know, what's going into the sausage here?
there's definitely some reflection off my head. Yeah, I may end up in federal prison.